In classrooms today, writing instruction is entering a new era. Artificial intelligence can now generate polished paragraphs, essays, and explanations in seconds. And that reality is raising an important question for educators. If AI can produce writing so easily, what should students actually be learning when they write? Because writing has never really been about producing text. Writing is about thinking. It's about forming ideas, evaluating information, making decisions, revising reasoning, and communicating meaning. Two powerful frameworks help us think about this shift in a productive way. The first is UnBlooms, developed by education researcher Tina Austin. UnBlooms reimagines how learning tasks and assessment should work in a world where AI can generate answers. The second is the Writing Carousel, developed by Vantage Learning. The carousel helps us understand the complex cognitive work involved in skilled writing and how students develop those skills through iterative practice. When these two frameworks are combined, they offer a powerful model for teaching writing in the age of AI. UnBlooms helps us design learning experiences that require thinking. The Writing Carousel helps us teach the writing processes that support that thinking. Together, they help us move beyond assigning writing and toward designing learning that develops thoughtful, reflective writers. For many years, writing assignments often focused on a fairly simple structure. A prompt was given, students produced a piece of writing, teachers evaluated the finished product. But in an AI world, that structure begins to break down. If a tool can produce a polished response instantly, the challenge is no longer simply completing the assignment. Instead, the real challenge becomes thinking through the ideas behind the writing. This is where Tina Austin's UnBlooms framework becomes especially powerful. UnBlooms shifts our focus from evaluating final products to examining the thinking processes that produce them. Rather than asking, did the student produce an answer? We begin asking, how did the student reason through the problem? What decisions did they make? What ideas did they evaluate? And how did their thinking evolve? AI has introduced a new reality into classrooms. Students can now generate writing that appears sophisticated, organized, and grammatically correct. But polished output does not necessarily indicate understanding. A student might submit a paragraph that reads beautifully, but the real question becomes, did they understand the ideas within it? Did they evaluate the information? Did they question assumptions? Did they revise their thinking? Or did they simply accept the first answer that appeared? This is why instruction and assessment must evolve. Instead of focusing primarily on finished writing products, educators must increasingly focus on the thinking behind those products. And that shift sits at the heart of UnBlooms. Many traditional writing prompts were designed for a very different technological world. They often ask students to summarize information, repeat known ideas, or explain concepts that already have predictable answers. But tasks like this are now easily completed by AI systems. When an assignment simply asks students to retrieve and restate information, it may no longer require much intellectual engagement from the learner. UnBlooms challenges us to rethink how we design these learning experiences. Instead of writing prompts that ask students to reproduce knowledge, We design prompts that require interpretation and judgment. The goal is no longer simply producing writing. The goal becomes thinking through meaningful questions. This shift from prompts to problems is one of the most important ideas in the Unbloom's framework. Strong learning tasks ask students to do more than explain information. They require students to make decisions, interpret evidence, evaluate competing ideas, and develop their own perspective. In other words, students must engage intellectually with the ideas they are writing about. This is where writing becomes much more than a product. Writing becomes the vehicle through which students explore, test, and refine their thinking. And this is exactly where the writing carousel becomes an essential instructional tool. Another important insight from Unbloom's involves the role of student voice. AI can generate information, but it cannot generate lived experience. It cannot replace an individual student's reasoning, and it cannot truly express authentic perspective. When assignments require students to bring their own thinking, interpretation, and experiences into their writing, the task becomes something AI cannot simply complete on their behalf. Students must take ownership of their ideas. They must justify their reasoning. They must explain why they see a problem in a particular way. And that human perspective becomes a central component of the learning process. Perhaps the most significant change involves the way we assess writing. For many years, writing evaluation focused heavily on the final product. Teachers graded essays based on grammar, structure, and correctness. But in a world where AI can produce polished writing quickly, the final essay alone may not tell us much about what the student actually understands. Unbloom's encourages educators to focus assessment on something deeper. Instead of primarily evaluating the finished text, we begin evaluating the reasoning behind the writing. Students are asked to demonstrate the decisions they make, the revisions they implemented, the critiques they developed, and the reasoning that guided those choices. The question shifts from, "What did you write?" to, "Why did you write it that way?" This shift transforms writing assessment into an evaluation of thinking. In this model, students are not simply submitting final essays. They are demonstrating the reasoning that shaped those essays. Students may show what they changed, why they changed it, what evidence influenced their decisions, and how their learning evolved during revision. These reflections allow teachers to see the intellectual work behind the writing, and they help students develop strong metacognitive habits. Students begin to recognize that writing is not simply producing sentences. It is a process of refining ideas. This is where the writing carousel, developed by Vantage Learning, provides critical support. The writing carousel helps educators understand the cognitive demands involved in skilled writing. Strong writing draws on multiple interconnected abilities. Students must learn how to develop ideas, organize their thinking, elaborate with meaningful details, refine language and style, and revise their work through reflection. Importantly, these processes are not linear steps. Writers move back and forth between them. They revise ideas. They reorganize arguments. They strengthen explanations. They refine language. The carousel captures this recursive nature of writing. While Unbloom's focuses on how learning tasks and assessment should be designed, the Writing Carousel provides the instructional framework that helps students develop the skills needed to do that work well. To see how these frameworks work together, imagine a traditional writing prompt. A teacher might assign, "Write an essay explaining the causes of climate change." This asks students to summarize information. AI can easily generate a response. Now, imagine redesigning that task using principles from Unbloom's. The assignment might become, "Several solutions have been proposed to address climate change. Evaluate 2 possible solutions and recommend which one should be prioritized in your community. Explain the reasoning behind your decision." Now, the task requires interpretation and evaluation. Students must examine multiple perspectives. They must weigh evidence. They must justify their reasoning. Students might begin by gathering information or even consulting AI tools, but the real learning happens in what comes next. Students critique the information they encounter. They revise their thinking. They clarify their reasoning. And as they do that work, they cycle through the writing domains described in the Writing Carousel. They develop ideas. They organize their argument. They elaborate with evidence. They refine language for their audience. They revise their writing as their thinking evolves. The final product becomes only one part of the learning process. What matters most is the thinking that produced it. Artificial intelligence has changed the landscape of writing instruction, but it has not diminished the importance of writing. In fact, it has made writing more important than ever, because writing is one of the most powerful tools we have for developing thoughtful, reflective thinkers. Tina Austin's Unbloom's framework helps educators design learning experiences that require authentic intellectual engagement. The Writing Carousel, developed by Vantage Learning, helps teachers guide students through the complex processes that skilled writing requires. Together, these frameworks offer a clear path forward for writing instruction. Students engage with meaningful problems. They develop ideas through iterative writing. They reflect on their reasoning. They revise their thinking. And they learn that writing is not simply about producing text. It is about understanding ideas, evaluating information, and communicating thoughtful perspectives. In the end, the goal of education has never been to produce perfect essays. The goal has always been to develop thoughtful, capable thinkers. Students learn to question ideas, evaluate information, revise their reasoning, and explain their thinking clearly. They are building skills that extend far beyond the classroom. In a world shaped by artificial intelligence, those abilities will matter more than ever. By combining thoughtful learning design with strong writing instruction, we create classrooms where writing becomes a tool for reflection, analysis, and discovery. And that is exactly what the Unbloom's framework and the Writing Carousel make possible. Together, they help us prepare students, not just to write well, but to think well.